Well, welcome to this video, and I hope you like it. If you do, click the like button, hit subscribe, and share with a friend. Okay, I want to talk a little bit today about the loss and to some extent the addition of species in a habitat. And a good analogy, you know, you always hear the sort of cliche about the web of life. But if you imagine the environment in a specific place being like a spider web, if you remove any one strand, depending on what the strand is, it has a different effect on it. You know, if you've got one of the main strands that are supporting it, you know, it might partially collapse or at least weaken an awful lot. If you just pluck out a little small piece that's connecting something else, maybe it doesn't hurt it so much. But if even these lesser things, you pluck out enough of them, it starts changing the effectiveness of the web for catching flies, which is the main reason that spiders create these little nets here. And, you know, that's one way to look at the loss of species. You know, it's not like if, you know, one type of sparrow disappears, if everything else stays the same, it's not like the loss of that one species is just going to collapse the whole system. But you take out enough of them, and, you know, it does alter the web. It alters its effectiveness. In some species, when you take them out, it makes a huge impact on the strength of the web. And, you know, the other thing going on, almost to a greater extent in some areas, at least with the smaller, less structural things, is we're getting other pieces added in. And sometimes they're replacing things. Sometimes they're effectively eliminating pieces of the web itself. It's almost like you're taking just random junk and throwing it at a spider web, you know? Pieces of grass or sticks or something. It's like, okay, here's a piece that doesn't belong. Now it's part of the web. And sometimes, you know, it doesn't affect it much. Sometimes it might affect it a lot. Sometimes it might break something structurally. And that's more or less the way that alien species are. And we don't always know ahead of time. That's one of the things. It's like I used to be really into the pets. You know, I was into the reptiles, mainly reptiles and amphibians. And I mean, it's just so wondrous to be able to order things from all around the world and have them delivered to your house now. That's not even like the old days where you had to find a pet shop. You can go online. You want a snake, you can order it off the internet. And for an even longer time, it's been that way with plants. There's always been mail order catalogs of exotic plants, and people care less about plants. I mean, you can grow the most invasive thing in the world in your front yard, and if it has pretty flowers, your neighbors probably won't say anything. If you have a pet alligator, people might freak out. Alligator probably ain't going to do anything to anybody. Not going to do half the damage that plant's going to do. At least not by himself, and at least not in this environment. That's the other kicker. You know, having exotic tropical pets available in a temperate spot like up here around Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, not a big deal. If somebody has a ball python and it gets loose, it's probably going to die the first winter. Even something that manages to survive for a few years, you know, it's not going to be happy. Even if it finds another one by some chance, it's not like conditions are really conducive for it to breed and be successful and expand its population. On the other hand, in Florida, pretty much anything except for the most delicate of tropical species can survive in Florida. And Florida was a place where a lot of people were raising these things, and they got loose from, you know, hurricanes and coming through and this and that, but a lot of it's just people not taking care of shit. There's good people and there's bad people in every business. And even to some extent, some of your PETA types are part of the problem. Because there was a rash of people claiming to be affiliated with PETA who were just breaking into pet shops and releasing things into the wild. Not good. Some of the worst things that happened from the quote-unquote age of discovery when Europeans were traveling all over the world was the introduction of invasive species. Cats, rats, and goats have totally decimated many islands all over the globe, responsible for the extinction of many, many species. There are islands out there that nothing else lives but cats, rats, and goats. They just exterminated everything else. Sometimes, I'm sure there's some that are totally devoid of life now because eventually that system just collapsed. They ate themselves out of house and home. It wasn't big enough to support them. But yeah, it's and the other big thing is mosquitoes. You know, there are a lot of places today that have problems with malaria that didn't have any mosquitoes until, you know, sailors brought them there. And these are fairly extreme cases. On a continent, things usually aren't that extreme. They're usually not that locked into boundaries, but there's a lot of your Polynesian islands in that. They've had a lot of mosquito-borne illness there, and mosquitoes aren't native. Mosquitoes never made it that far off the continent to those volcanic islands out there. Mosquitoes just couldn't cross that much ocean. They are not native. Never there. All of a sudden, now you got mosquitoes and mosquito-borne diseases. And you know, there's just so many things that sometimes things are better, sometimes things are worse. But so much of the world has changed, and each generation thinks the way that the world is while they're growing up is the baseline. That's the baseline people tend to measure things against. Even in my lifetime, I've seen some things like the invasion of the Japanese knotweed. People are just used to that now. They're blind to it. You know, it's just part of the landscape. There's especially along stream banks where it's fairly disturbed, you'll just see, you know, whole banks and road cuts too. You'll see whole banks of Japanese knotweed, just, you know, hundreds and hundreds of yards of nothing else. And, you know, back when I was a kid, these were all wildflowers. This was Joe Pye weed and ironweed and asters and things like that. Just, those were the things that grew everywhere. It was more of a mix and, you know, more diversity. The biodiversity is gone. And, you know, some people argue some, you know, incorrect pseudoscience about survival of the fittest, and you're not understanding fittest for what. Everything kind of adapts to each other. You know, that web is unique. You start putting in different pieces, you got a different web. And part of the problem with the loss of biodiversity is you end up with a web that just ends up with less strings in it to begin with. and you end up with an ecosystem that has less strings that can break before something just collapses. I mean, if most, if not all of your areas around here that are disturbed end up being nothing but one plant or two plants or something like that, if some disease comes along that affects that one or two plants, you know, you end up with nothing. And then there's nothing for herbivores to eat. There's nothing for, you know, butterflies and bees and everything else to feed on. You're affecting a lot more things than just the wildflowers themselves. In the case of the Japanese knotweed, it has been pointed out by people I've talked to who raise bees, bees actually do like Japanese knotweed. But even going to that extreme, Japanese knotweed has flowers about now. So if you have a monoculture of Japanese knotweed, even though it's a good plant for pollinators during, say, the month of August, maybe a little bit of September, great. What the hell are pollinators going to live on the rest of the year? Because when you have the biodiversity, you had some things that bloomed early in the year, you had some things that bloomed late in the year, you had things all along that kind of kept things running. So, you know, the web itself, you know, it sort of builds itself into a functioning system, and you start playing with the system and changing the system, you end up with a weaker system. And, you know, like I said, some things some species would be considered more structural to that system, and some species would be less structural to that system. But even the so-called lesser important species, you take out of enough of them, you know, you're fundamentally changing the functionality of that web as well. So I'll leave you with that. Hopefully it explains things a little bit. I'm not trying to make things more confusing. I'm trying to make things simpler. So, you know, shoot me a comment. Let me know what you think. I'll see you on the next one. Well, I hope you found that video informative. Hopefully it made you think. And please click the like button and subscribe if you haven't done that already, and check out the video that should be appearing somewhere around me here, and I hope to see you on the next one. Thanks.